That's brilliant. So, Martin, thank you very much. So, just for the benefit of our viewers, those who are watching, could you please tell us what your job title is at the ASO clubs?
Yes, so I am the manager of Centre Operations and Caseworking at ASIC Clubs.
Okay, and so what does that entail?
It entails kind of thus far, it's had a focus on ensuring that ASIC Clubs is complying with best practice in terms of operations. So a lot of building and kind of health and safety and maintenance. Also ensuring that we are well supported by volunteers. Through lockdown, we were quite lucky to be comfortably supported by a core group of volunteers, a lot of whom who were furloughed from work. But
Yes.
gradually, as circumstances change and they return to work, we kind of always have a bit of a jigsaw to ensure that we're well supported by volunteers. I support a small team of caseworkers as they support our service users, guests. So they and we will support individuals with, our laundry donations, or if they need toiletries, or with caseworking. So through lockdown, we're meeting a lot of people who might be homeless for the first time. They might have only been working cash in hand. And we support people with benefits, and we provide housing advice. So I support the team to coordinate that. And I also work kind of continue our partnerships with, the local churches and the schools, but also supermarkets. And we did used to do corporate volunteering, but that's been on hold. Okay, so I was just saying what our day-to-day involves. So I was on partnerships, so I ensure that we continue to work well with our partners, the corporate partners, supermarkets, churches, schools, but also ensuring we have a lot of different in-house services. So kind of with Glassdoor, who provide housing advice and casework, and we have the health inclusion team who come twice a week. So we have an in-house nurse, and they can provide a range of healthcare services. We have kind of links with DWP. They used to come to us, but they've put that on hold for now. But we can contact them when we need to, and they can provide, they can speed up some benefit processes and things like that. So that's very helpful. So that, in brief, is what the centre manager role involves at the moment.
That sounds like lots going on. And how long have you been doing it for?
I was appointed in early April,
Early
so
April, so
nearly 6 months.
nearly 6 months. And how is it all going?
It's very well. It's obviously a very unusual time to work generally for anybody, but also to change jobs. So it's been really useful to kind of, I think, work in these circumstances and support our service users in these circumstances, and it's been very rewarding. It's been
Good, good.
a pleasure.
Just thinking about, in what ways has the lockdown affected the work of the ASO clubs?
At the beginning of lockdown, so we've luckily been able to continue to provide safe services throughout lockdown, where many other services had to stop. And I think part of that was due to the layout of our grounds, and even external to us, the fact that we have a very long pavements, where we can have people waiting for a service whilst distancing, has been a luxury and a huge benefit, and I think is part of the reason that we've been able to continue in the way that we have. And also we have an external courtyard outside of the main centre, which means that we can operate the takeaway food service through there, and we can have people come through and pick up their food and do so safely. We've been operating in a fairly similar way from March up until now. We haven't really revised any of the changes that we made since March. So we've had to put a stop to showers, and that remains the same now. we have been able to continue doing laundry. We're able to still accept donations of clothes and donations of food, and the processes have changed slightly in terms of how we manage that and how we distribute it to people. And at the beginning of lockdown, we saw the demand for the service increase quite a lot. So when the service was open, we'd serve between 80 and 100 people a day. And at the beginning of lockdown, that peaked for 2 or 3 months to about 150 to 180 people a day. And luckily, we continued to receive quite a high level of food donations because there was a drive generally, I think, in the community to try to make sure that services like ours were able to keep running. So they balanced each other out. And then as other services felt safer to reopen, we have noticed a bit of a reduction where our average numbers now go anywhere between about 110 people to 150 people a day, Monday to Friday. So the demand has been there, and the demand still hasn't reduced compared to prior to lockdown. And we're still able to provide one-to-one caseworking with or without an appointment in the building, but we're having to manage the people coming in and out of the building. So that people can't come in without notifying us or without a specific need, which most people have gotten used to, whereas before there was obviously a lot of freedom of movement and people might treat it like a second home, or, you know, it's where, so I think generally in terms of the safety procedures and sanitizing hands and queuing and distancing, people have adapted quite well to that, and they've begun to understand that that's, you know, how we need to operate at the moment.
Thank you. Could you say a little bit more about the circumstances of those who come? What kind of needs have you kind of encountered?
So most, but not all of the people that we support are homeless. We're very open door. So if someone is over 18, it doesn't necessarily matter if they have a connection to a borough, or, you know, if they're homeless. If it's mental health, if it's drug and alcohol, or if they're just marginalised and isolated on a low income, we welcome, you know, nearly everybody. The ethos of ASA clubs is to support the homeless, and most of the people that we do support are homeless. But like I say, we welcome anybody. And if someone did have a link to a much more kind of distant part of London in terms of practicality of support, we might signpost them to that area if they need a tenancy support, because they will know more. But generally, like I say, we're open of who we encounter. As it's well known in the homeless community, it's disproportionately men. So we do see a lot more men than we do women. But we try to support everybody equally.
Yeah. And what are the kind of various causes of the homelessness in those who come?
Kind of how they come to be homeless.
Yeah.
Well, during lockdown, we saw quite a unique way of people being impacted by homeless. So people being homeless for the first time, and you know, there might have been people who were working cash in hand, or you know, not having mainstream jobs that were impacted or had to stop due to the circumstances. And, you know, there was a big push to house everybody in hotels, and I think a lot of people were offered move-on options, and a lot of people were housed in hotels, but the move-on options might not have always been appropriate. So a lot of the people that we have supported longer term who might have kind of recurrent issues around homelessness, we might have seen them be temporarily housed in the hotel and potentially offered a follow-on option that might not have been appropriate for them. So the circumstances that might lead to homelessness, like I say, breakdown in income because their income has been uniquely impacted by coronavirus, or, you know, family breakdown. We work with a lot of people who might be seeking asylum, they might not have recourse to public funds, they might be fleeing domestic violence, they might be fleeing some form of trauma in their home country. And we do have some expertise through Glassdoor on site who can support people with no recourse to public funds, and also part of the health inclusion team who come here once a week. Karima, she has expertise of supporting people with immigration needs and immigration issues in terms of healthcare, such as signing up with a GP and what their rights are, what their entitlement is. So that's a bit of a snapshot of who we see and how they come to us and how we support them.
Yeah, no, and thank you. You've kind of touched on many of the different ways that you support those who come. Are there kind of are there? My next question is, what support do you offer? You already kind of touched on a few, but is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah. So one thing that we used to do a lot more of that we're trying to rebuild is education and training, and a lot of the in-house groups generally as well. So I think I've mentioned most of what we do, but I've kind of neglected to think of that because it hasn't happened within my time. But we definitely want to try to strategize about how to reintroduce that, because I think a lot of people might feel even more isolated and more lonely because of the circumstances, and we might be missing a good opportunity to introduce, some kind of platform for them to obtain some, qualification or some education, either remotely or, in our outdoor space if it's safe to do so. So before we had a very vibrant bike club. We would invite people in to do art classes, music classes, and qualifications that would lead to some kind of certification. And so that's something that's really on our radar at the moment that we're hoping to be able to reintroduce as soon as possible. But that used to be a much larger part of the service.
Yeah. And how can churches support the ASOF clubs and churches as an organization, but also churches, individuals as Christians? How can we support the ASOF clubs?
So we kind of, the way that ASOF clubs keeps itself going, we rely very heavily on public donation of kind of money and goods, and we do fundraising, we apply for grants, and we just kind of apply for whatever pots of money there are. We have little to no statutory government funding, and so that means we are incredibly grateful and dependent upon all of the support that we get from every other avenue. So that that spans everything from the clothes that we give to people, but our needs in terms of material objects can be quite variable. So with clothing and toiletries, because we do have very limited space, it usually depends on what our need at that time is. So some people, they might be very generous and kind of feel very humanitarian and go ahead and collect, a massive amount of stuff, but it might be more than what we can make good use of. So we try to be as explicit as we can at any one point in time of like clothing and toiletries, what kind of goods we need. And with food, so we anything we can't cook, we'll give away. We do comply to best before and expiry dates. So anything that has passed its use by, we cannot use. And with best before, we need to make whatever we feel a best judgment decision is. If it's a couple of months after, if it's tinned food, for instance, then we can, use it. So food, we rarely have waste unless it's given to us very close to the expiry. So we usually make very good use of food, and I think that's historically been a large part of the harvest.
If anyone wants to support you financially, what's the best way of doing that?
So we have a few different platforms that people can do that. So we have a Virgin Money Giving page, which should be fairly accessible if people wanted to Google ASOF Club's Virgin Giving, but I can also send, along with a wish list, the link to that if needed. We accept checks as well, and we can also even accept cash donations.
And in the past, we've also had Sainsbury's kind of gift cards and things like that. Is that
Yeah, those
helpful?
things are really useful because
Yeah.
we you know we don't too often have to buy our own food goods because luckily we can keep going with the donations. But when we do need to buy our own things, especially fish and chips, which we have regularly on Friday, we can't always guarantee that we'll get enough of that to
Yeah.
kind of cater. So that's one thing that we often buy weekly, and things like oil and cling film and so Sainsbury's vouchers, and it doesn't have to be Sainsbury's. Any local shop that's easy for us to go to.
Yeah.
And we also have an Amazon wish list that I try to keep as up to date as possible. There's a couple of things on there, such as small mobile phones, which sometimes are very helpful to give to guests. For instance, if they're rough sleeping and they kind of have to move around because they don't feel safe and the outreach team can't find them, if they have a mobile phone, the outreach team can call them and try to locate them. And on the wish list, I've added all the standard like PPE, gloves and masks and sanitizer and things like that. And then there's thermals on there, sleeping bags, and yeah.
Uh, Great. Anything else you want to say, Martin?
No, I hope it's been helpful.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure to kind of explain the services, and I look forward to seeing how things work and how things materialize in the harvest because it's my
Yeah.
first one with Ace of Clubs.
Brilliant. Well, all the best.